I'm so excited and I just can't hide it. Guys, it is the best day of the week because it is the day of the week that I get to read with you guys. Miss Lawson here, and I'm so excited that we are going to keep reading Lunch Money. I can't wait to see what Greg and Mara do next. We are starting chapters 15 today. Put my popcorn to the side, and let's see what our learning intention is for today. Today we are learning how the author uses descriptive details to make the story come alive. We know we are successful when we can identify descriptive details in the text, define similes and metaphors, and describe the meaning of the simile and metaphor. So you might be wondering, Miss Lawson, what's descriptive detail? I can't remember. Well, the author uses descriptive details to help readers visualize characters, settings, and events. These descriptive details can include sensory language or details that appeal to the senses. So maybe something you can smell or touch or taste. They can also include observations and figurative language, such as similes and metaphors. So if you remember, similes are comparing two things using like or as, and a metaphor is not using like or as, but you are still comparing those two things. So let's look at our vocabulary word for today, contrast. Good job, guys. He loved working with the sharp contrast of black and white. So you have black and white. What do you think contrast means? Yeah, they're different. They contrast, they go against each other. So for our foundational skill today, we are working with suffixes. But the main suffix we're working with is, first, a suffix is always added to the end of a word. The suffix "-ion" or "on" can be added to the present tense of some verbs to create a noun. It means the act of blanking or the condition of blanked. So that kind of is confusing. So let's look at one. Reflection. So the act of reflecting or the condition of being reflected. So that base word is reflect, and then they added the shun, reflection. So let's look at some more. Adding the suffix shun to the following words. What about this word, interrupt? If you interrupt the class, it is a interruption. You're adding that shun. What about instruct? Teachers instruct the class, or it could be called instruction. So what would it mean if I use the word instruction? It's the act of instructing or teaching. Good job, guys. So for your foundational skill practice today, you are going to underline the base word and circle the suffix. Then you're going to use those three words in a sentence. You got this. Let's start chapter 15, lessons. Friday night at the Kenton house was family movie night. But tonight, Ross and Edward had gone out with their high school friends, which was fine with Greg. That meant he got to pick the movie. By 7:30, Greg had his mom and dad, half the couch, and a big bowl of popcorn. Now you know why Miss Lawson made popcorn today. A bottle of root beer and good old Indiana Jones all to himself. The movie started with a bang. Between the action and the music and the sound effects, Greg barely noticed the doorbell, barely noticed his mom getting up to answer it. She came back to the family room and said, "Greg, it's Mara Shaw." With his eyes still on the screen, Greg said, "What?" She said, "Put the movie on pause." When the room was quiet, she said, "It's Mara Shaw," at the door. "Mara?" Greg said. "What's she want?" His mom shrugged. "She just asked if you were home." Greg took a quick sip of root beer and got up off the couch. Mara stood by the door. She held a big brown mailing envelope, and before Greg could say a word, she handed it to him. "New drawings. I did them after school, and you have to look at them before I make any more to tell me how I'm doing. I know I've got the size right because they're just like the ones in your crayon story, and I used good art paper because I know you have to put ink on them, but you have to tell me about everything else." Did Mara ask, "Is this a bad time?" No. Did she say, "I'll leave these so you can look at them"? No. She stood there tapping her foot, bossy as ever. Greg hated cold popcorn, and he wished he'd kept his mouth shut about Mara's pictures. He ripped open the envelope and yanked out the paper so he could whip through them. Then he could push this intruder out the door and get back to his movie. But Mara's first picture grabbed him and pulled him in. She had done the cover art. The picture focused on the unicorn, its long, twisted horn poking all the way up through the word unicorn in the title. A nice touch. But best of all, Mara had drawn dark woods with the scary outline of bare trees, and in the distance, the tower. And in the bottom right corner of the picture, an ogre lurked in the undergrowth, eyes huge, jaw open. Greg nodded. Great cover. Really. This is great. Without thinking, he sat down cross-legged on the front hall carpet and flipped to the next picture, which was page 1, where the unicorn first realizes she's lost. The small page was split in half from the upper right corner to the lower left corner, which made 2 panels shaped like triangles. The top panel showed the frightened creature walking down a forest path, looking back over her shoulder. The dividing line was a jagged lightning bolt, and below it there was a close-up of the unicorn's eyes looking up at storm clouds, with the woods and the darkness crowding in. Still nodding, Greg looked at the third drawing and said, "This is good too." Mara had already figured out how to use every bit of space, a big challenge on such tiny pages. One larger panel helped the reader understand the whole scene, and other smaller ones zoomed in on the most dramatic details. She had also trimmed the story down into a real comic book script. The words were penciled into the speech balloons. Greg, it was his dad. Should we hold the movie? No, it's okay, Greg called back. I've seen it, and I have to help on this a little. It's some drawings. We'll be down in the playroom. I'll be there later. At the moment, Mara's sketches were a lot more interesting than the Temple of Doom. Greg wanted to try inking 1 or 2 of them. Here. He handed all the drawings back to Mara and pointed her towards the basement doorway. Go down there. I've got to go get some stuff from my room. 3 minutes later, Greg carried a bin of art materials into the playroom. He dragged a chair over and set up a work area on the ping pong table. He took Mara's cover picture out of the envelope, hurried upstairs to the family room, ignored his mom and dad in the movie, and made 2 copies of the cover. Practice sheets. Greg trotted back to the playroom, sat down, chose a small brush, dipped it into a bottle of India ink, and began to experiment. The unicorn was going to be white, so that meant he had to darken everything around it. He loved working with the sharp contrast of black and white. He put down the brush, picked up a pen, and dipped its thin metal point into the ink. Time to add some detail to the unicorn's mane. So our focus question is, how is the last paragraph narrated differently from previous paragraphs? So not till we get down here are we worried about this question, so I'm going to keep reading. Mara came and stood behind him, craning her neck to see. Greg ignored her. She moved to his right side, put a hand on the ping pong table, and leaned in closer. Hey, Greg said, don't shake the table. Well, what am I supposed to do? She asked. Do whatever you want. Watch TV, go home, but don't shake the table. Here, take this paper and a ruler, and there are pencils and erasers in the bin. Make some more drawings. You can sit over there. So here it is, the paragraph we're focused on. How is it narrated differently from previous paragraphs in this chapter? Mara set up a little workspace on the low table in front of the TV. She sat on the floor with her back against the couch, facing Greg. She shuffled through her envelope of papers. She got out her story script and found the next page she wanted to work on. She used the ruler to draw the boundaries for the page. Then she made a few marks on the paper. Okay, so what do you notice? Who is the focus of that paragraph? Right, it's Mara. This whole book has been about Greg, but this paragraph shifts and tells us what Mara is doing. And why do you think the author changed the focus from Greg's to Mara's thoughts? Why are we in Mara's head right now? What do you guys think? Let's read a little bit more and see what it shows us. Looked at them and then erased them all. She made another start but then stopped and rubbed it all out again. She couldn't get into it. And she knew why. Sitting on the floor in Greg Kenton's playroom was just too weird. Mara got up quietly and tiptoed over next to the ping pong table. She stood at Greg's elbow, watching him add tiny lines with a crow quill pen. When it looked like a good moment to speak, she said, "I forgot to tell you, I really want to do all the lettering myself." So, by showing us Mara's thoughts, what is that helping us do? Yeah, it's kind of showing us how she is feeling. We've kind of heard from Greg the whole book and how he feels about Mara, but we've never really heard from Mara. So this is kind of our chance to get to hear it. Greg looked up at her and made a face. "Well, it can't be in cursive like you used before. It's too hard to read, especially when it's small. How's your printing?" "Are you kidding?" said Mara. "Mrs. Layton in 3rd grade, she had to force me to use cursive. I was so good at printing." Greg reached for a, sorry guys. Oh my goodness. Greg reached for a lettering pen, the kind with a point that's almost like a needle. He unscrewed the cap and slid a piece of lined paper towards Mara. "Here, this is the kind of pen you have to use. Don't push hard or you'll wreck it. Try writing something." Mara made a few marks to get the feel of the pen point, and then she wrote, "This pen is different, but I like it." Greg looked at the sentence and nodded. Pretty good. It was actually neater and cleaner than his own writing, and he'd been working on his for 2 years. He said, "But you'll have to practice and get it a little smaller, and you have to keep watching how many words you use. The fewer, the better." "I know that," said Mara. "Oh, so now you're an expert, right?" "No," snapped Mara, "but I'm not dumb. I really do get it. How the pictures have to tell most of the story, so don't talk to me like I'm an idiot." Greg bit back a perfect insult. He pointed at the other table and said, "So go be a genius over there, okay? I'm trying to get something done here." For the next 30 minutes, there was no talking, only the soft scratching sounds of pens or pencils on paper. Greg's mom came to ask if they wanted something to eat, but she stopped halfway down the stairs and then crept back up. She didn't want to interrupt, because when she saw what she saw reminded her of 2 kindergartners at the art table. Each child bent over some work, each completely unaware of the other, which wasn't quite true. Yes, Mara was working on a new mini page, and she was in that quiet, creative zone in her mind, but in the back of her thinking, she wished she could just walk over and stand behind Greg, watch him lay down those clear brushstrokes and impossibly thin lines of ink. That kid was creative, smart too, and almost nice sometimes, like when he'd apologized in the lunchroom earlier in the day. And even when he was acting all tough and mean, he was still funny. Like when he'd made her buy that ice cream sandwich as part of the deal, Mara had to admit it. Sometimes Greg was actually sort of cute. And Greg hadn't forgotten that Mara was sitting 10 feet away. He glanced up at her every few minutes, just a flick of his eye as if to make sure she was still there. Her talent was amazing, and she seemed willing to try anything. Of course, any minute now, she would probably go nuts again and do something that would make him want to strangle her. But when she wasn't trying to rule the world, like when she kept her big mouth shut and just sat there wrinkling her nose at a drawing, Mara wasn't that bad to have around. And think of it, a girl who loved comics? How cool was that? Almost an hour later, Greg broke the silence. "There, 2 pages and the cover, all inked. You get anything done?" Mara nodded and stood up stiffly. 2 more pages. She walked over and laid them on the ping pong table. Greg stood up and pulled Mara's new penciled pages closer, and he reached over and spread out his finished inked work in front of Mara. Then both of them leaned over the table, each inspecting the other's work. They were both impressed with what they saw, but there wasn't any gushing. "Yeah, those are okay," Greg said. Mara nodded. "Yours too." The phone rang, and Mara said, "Bet you anything that's my mom." It was, and Mara had to leave. "Here," Greg said, "take these home and do the lettering. You can borrow my pen." Mara nodded, and Greg sat down and went back to work. She said, "I'm going to bring over more pictures tomorrow." Greg shrugged. "Whatever." Then he thought a second and said, "But don't come until after 2. He had promised to wash both of the Jansen's cars before noon, and he had Saturday chores around home too. Plus, both his brothers might be gone by 2 in the afternoon. They were always worth avoiding." Mara gathered her things together and left. Greg didn't walk up to the front door with her, didn't even say goodbye. He was too busy. Greg stayed at the ping pong table almost another hour, and before he went up to say goodnight to his mom and dad, he had finished inking 2 more pages. As he lay in bed looking at the pattern that the street lights and the tree branches made on his ceiling, Greg thought about the evening. Inking Mara's drawings had been so different from working on his own pictures. He felt like he'd had to be more careful with hers. Careful not to put too many of his own ideas into them. Careful not to change her drawing style. And he had to admit it, the results were good. But as he drifted towards the edge of sleep, there was something else he would not admit. Admitting this other thing would have been too dangerous, because what Greg wouldn't admit was that he was almost, sort of, a little bit, maybe halfway glad about Mara coming back to work on her comic again on Saturday at 2. Ooh. So on page 145, it says a point like a needle. Is this a simile or a metaphor? What do you guys think? When they said the pen had a point like a needle. Good job, guys. Yeah, it's using that word like, which means it is a simile. What does this help us visualize? What sense is it using? Yeah, it is helping us see, it's helping me visualize the sharpness of the pen, because, you know, if you get poked with a needle, it hurts. So that pen is super sharp and has a very tiny line. So that simile comes in handy to help us visualize that story. On page 146, I see the detail soft, scratching sounds. What sense does that make us feel? So is it seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, touching? What is it? Yeah, it appeals to our hearing, because we can hear, again, kind of scratching on the table. You can envision yourself in there in the room with them and hear the scratches of the paper of them working. So your reading response today is, what details show that Greg and Mara's relationship is changing? So you have a few pages to look back on, and you're looking for, how have they changed? Have a great rest of your day, 4th graders. Bye.